While the American Civil War only lasted a mere 4 years, resulting in a victory for the North, the death toll was staggering. Over 600,000 people died on the battlefield, and more perished from disease and illness. To this day, historians have argued about what truly sparked this conflict, such as, was there more to it than just slavery? During this time, some truly remarkable and shocking events took place, from wounds glowing in the dark to armies collecting urine for the war effort. I'm Jake the Voice Par, and these are 10 things you probably didn't know about the American Civil War. Some people these days believe Abraham Lincoln, 16th President of the United States, was a hero for his time because of his anti-slavery stance. This is not entirely true. Lincoln denied being an abolitionist and believed black slaves to be racially inferior. During the Great Debates of 1858, slavery was discussed. Lincoln said, "I will say then that I am not, nor ever have been, in favor of bringing about in any way the social and political equality of the whites and black races, and that the white man is to have the superior position." It's possible that he said these things for the sake of political expediency, but still, what a nasty man. The first deaths in the American Civil War were accidents. The Confederates fired over 4,000 shells at Fort Sumter. The Union forces decided to surrender and saluted by firing 50 of their cannons. Unfortunately, during the ceremony, 2 Union soldiers blew themselves up. As for the men in gray, during the Battle of Chancellorsville in 1863, the troops decided to fire their weapons into the dead of night. Due to poor visibility, they ended up killing General Jackson, their ally. A bit of caution would have been helpful. If you were injured on the battlefield, you were in for a world of hurt. Gunshot wounds were prone to gangrene infections. The only known cure was to cut off any infected limbs as quickly as possible. The top brass could do it in half a minute. Some doctors jabbed their fingers into gunshot wounds and pushed lodged bullets out of any nearby exits, then felt for any broken bones. Most had little to no experience or training. Anesthetic was not mandatory, though there were times when patients died via overdose. Strangely enough, roughly 3 in 4 soldiers survived the gruesome and painful amputation procedure, which was a notably higher rate than civilians. Only half of them survived. One of the ingredients for gunpowder is nitrate. It was discovered that urine contained this chemical, yet collecting large quantities proved difficult. Initially, the Confederates ended up trying to collect lumps of urine-soaked earth from barns and smokehouses. Mining officer John Harrelson of Selma, Alabama, published an advert in a newspaper requesting the women of the town to save their chamber pots so that their tinkle can be collected in a barrel for the war effort. Army poets got creative and decided to write poems to the tune of "Maryland, My Maryland." Confederate poets shunned the idea. An unknown figure wrote a few additional tongue-in-cheek verses dubbed "The Yankee View of It," which protested that there was found in this compound one serious objection: no soldier boy could sniff it without having an erection. Even during wartime, soldiers still had a sense of humor, a naughty one at that. General Thomas "Stonewall" Jackson was a bit of a celebrity during his time. Before he joined the Confederate Army, he was beloved by black slaves for his firm but friendly attitude toward them. He stood his ground like a stone wall as he called in reinforcements during the hectic First Battle of Bull Run on July 21, 1861, hence the nickname. In 1863, a large-scale battle took place. Stonewall was accidentally shot by his allies, and he was sent to the hospital. While everyone else's limbs were tossed into a pile outside, Jackson's left arm was buried in its own personal grave outside of Elwood Manor, Virginia. Stonewall died of pneumonia a week later, but was buried in Lexington, about 500 miles away from his amputated limb. A year later, Union soldiers recovered the arm and reburied it in a location that remains unknown to this day. Still, the grave remains intact, and its tombstone is engraved with the simple message, "Arm of Stonewall Jackson." Stonewall was an odd one. He loved to walk around raising his finger to the sky since he thought one of his arms and legs were bigger and heavier than the other. So, by raising his finger, he would balance his blood flow, thus alleviating said limbs. Funnily enough, during the first battle of Bull Run, it is said that while he was raising his finger on horseback, it was hit by shrapnel. Doctors wanted to amputate the finger, but Stonewall turned down the offer. Thankfully, it healed without infection. Perhaps the enemy saw Jackson's finger and thought he was gloating like, "I bet you Yankees can't hit my finger from all the way over there." The Battle of the Crater was arguably the most embarrassing event to have taken place during the American Civil War. On paper, the plan sounded devious enough. Dig a mine underneath the Confederates, detonate some explosives, and blast them to kingdom come. The blast killed 200 enemies and left a massive crater, but the Union soldiers foolishly climbed inside of it. The Confederates arrived and picked them off like fish in a barrel. Thankfully, the troops of the North had reinforcements that counterattacked the preoccupied Southerners, but the casualties spoke for themselves. Almost 3,800 Union soldiers were killed, captured, or otherwise, compared to the 1,500 on the Confederate side. General Ulysses Grant called it one of the most depressing events in the war. Too right. Sometimes it's best to put on a brave face when the odds are unanimously against you. Corporal Thomas Galloway of the Federal Army did just that, and not only did he survive the encounter, he also captured 50 enemy troops. During the Battle of Gettysburg, Galloway was bruised and battered and limped his way to the retreating enemy. Despite being a very vulnerable target, he rounded up 50 enemy soldiers and took them back to base to become prisoners of war. Astonishingly, Galloway was only 15 years old. One of the strangest mysteries to have taken place in the American Civil War was during the Battle of Shiloh. As the injured lied in the fields en masse, their wounds started to glow in the dark and, later, healed considerably faster than everyone else's. Soldiers called this freaky sight Angel's Glow. This phenomenon was debunked in 2002 by William Martin and Jonathan Curtio, two teenagers researching ideas for their science school project. They discovered it was caused by a bacteria called photohaebdus luminescens. Body heat would have normally killed it, but since the battle took place on a cool day, the microorganisms landed on the wounds and ended up devouring the bad bacteria. Those healed by the Angel's Glow caught hypothermia instead. Bit of a double-edged sword, but it must have been quite a mesmerizing sight at the time. Contrary to what you've likely been taught in school, the Civil War did not decisively end after the famous Battle of Appomattox Courthouse. In actuality, the Confederate surrender was a rather messy and slow affair, as Confederate President Jefferson Davis wasn't captured until a month after General Lee and the Army of Virginia surrendered. Ironically, the Confederates actually won the last battle of the Civil War, which took place near Brownsville, Texas, even after most of the states and armies loyal to the Confederacy had already surrendered months prior. In fact, the last major Confederate force to surrender was an Indian one led by Cherokee Brigadier General Stand Watie. President Johnson actually formally declared the end of the American Civil War on August 20th, 1866. Unfortunately, due to his assassination, President Lincoln, who had pursued the war against the Confederacy for 4 grueling years, did not live to see the end of hostilities and the restoration of the Union. Those then are 10 facts you probably didn't know about the American Civil War. For more top lists just like this, be sure to leave a like and subscribe if you haven't already. Don't forget to check out our other top lists. Thank you very much for watching, and thanks for learning.